Welcome back to Gravitas. At a time when Donald Trump could possibly be cracking down at the Indian IT domain, it seems that Trump himself has been a beneficiary. We'll get to that story later on in our discussion, but we're now going to continue the conversation with our guest joining us from the United States. We have Glenn Carl joining us from Boston, as well as Arun Vishwanathan, a professor and cybersecurity expert joining us from Buffalo, New York. Thank you again for joining us, Arun. Let me now go to you with regards to the sentiment of Indian Americans there with all of this when it comes to the travel ban, the news about the H-1B cuts, quite a bit of a happening there since Trump has taken office. What's the sentiment there with those who are on immigrant visas?
You know, the people I have spoken to, I mean, the people are worried about it. I mean, there's no question about it. I mean, this from a sentiment standpoint makes people worried, and it's not just Indian Americans. It's many immigrants, which is, you know, the broad swath of the people in this country who come in. One thing which is pretty positive, however, is there are also a lot of protests against this. In Buffalo, New York, where I am, I mean, we had a protest this weekend, which was attended by about 2,000 or 3,000 people. And so, you know, on the one hand, we see policies being made and talks about, you know, stopping people from certain countries, which is a slippery slope that we don't want to go down. And on the other hand, we also see an outpouring of support from Americans, from companies, and from people from all over the world. So it is mixed, it is worrisome, but I'm very optimistic that, you know, in the end, I think this thing will get rationalized.
Arun, also, what about the student sentiment? You know, you're a professor there. You deal with students all the time. I'm not sure how many Indian American students are there in your university, but I'm sure in New York, quite a diverse state. What's their sentiment like, you know, in terms of them either once they graduate or even sort of the chatter when it comes to, you know, people from India or other countries going there to study abroad, knowing at a time when Trump is doing whatever he can to stop immigrants, even if it isn't from one of those 7 countries. What is that section of the population? How are they coping with this?
And I think that is the more worrisome part. In fact, you know, we do have, you know, the sizable majority of students who come into the United States come from India and China, especially, you know, foreign students who come in. And we have a sizable proportion of Indian students, Chinese students, and students from many of these countries as well. And they're worried. There's no question about it, because not only is there talk about changing immigration rules, H-1B visa rules, there's also talk about changing the OPT requirements. And the OPT requirements for the audience, for your audience, is, you know, in general, when you get a degree here, you get 1 year after your degree to do work in an allied field. That was increased to 2 years, to 24 months by Obama if you were in a STEM field. There's talk of changing that, and that has a direct impact on students who are either looking for a job or looking to do an internship or looking for some experience in the field in which they got a degree. That could be a sea change for people who are already here or who are planning to come here and eventually get a job. So that is very worrisome, and that, in a sense, may cause in the short term and even in the long term a reduction in the number of students who apply. And if that happens, that's going to be pretty catastrophic, because many universities in the United States rely on foreign students in order to make their gaps, in order to fill their requirements. So the students themselves are worried. The administrators are also worried. So this has got to be rationalized sooner than later.
All right, Glenn, let me now go back to you with regards to this. You know, we've seen quite a bit that Donald Trump has talked about. Let's sort of go really into the details. And, you know, do we expect, you know, some kind of how long he may actually stay in office? I know this may be a premature question. He's only been in office for about a month. But the fact that he's really had some issues with fellow Republicans, now the business community, the immigrant community, I mean, how likely is that? You know, 4 years, do we think that Trump may encounter more problems, given that he's really pushing strong with his agenda, but within the last not even month, he's created quite a bit of ruckus there?
Well, I think we can state with confidence that there will be continued problems and turmoil, or issues and turmoil, that arise with each initiative that he takes. I think that's certain. But I'm also confident that's not a positive statement or expression of support, really. But I'm unfortunately confident that we'll see the same dynamic play out that we have in other countries with a controversial figure like this, an authoritarian figure, meaning that the Republican Party on the whole, its various factions, find reasons to support Trump because they can advance their own narrower specific agenda, whether it's tax reductions or border control, or increased defense spending, or easing the separation of church and state, and on and on and on. And so people will enable him because they would reason as follows. Well, you know, the problem of Indians and Chinese, maybe that's unfortunate, but you know, I have nothing to do with them. And what I really want is to be able to pray in public schools. And so I will support him. And then you change the subject and the reasoning is the same. So I am not optimistic that the Republicans anytime soon will oppose Trump in a holistic way. They will advance their own agendas through Trump and then go along.
All right, Glenn, thank you so much for that update and insights and joining us for the discussion. We appreciate your time. Now let's get back to the conversation and go back to Arun. Arun, my question to you with regards to all of this is the role that the media has played there. Trump has certainly attacked the media, calling organizations like CNN fake news. I know you've had a little bit of a background and experience when it comes to dealing with that, especially as a cybersecurity expert. At the level and capacity that you can comment on, bring us up to speed on how the media coverage has now been there in the United States post his election.
Well, I think, this is one of these, strange moments in history where we have a president who does not like facts. And the media are doing their best to fight back, to put the... Hello?
Yeah, go ahead. Sorry, go ahead. You're live on air. Go ahead.
All right. And so, the media is doing its best. It is putting out facts. It's putting out information. It's doing the job of the watchdog. And if anything, I think we're seeing the media becoming much more activist in the United States, where media reports that are getting out much more often. And I think the media is doing a fantastic job trying to do the role of the balancing that they need to do. And that's become even more important now than ever before. So I see that happening, and I see that happening in the United States. I see reporting about cybersecurity issues, particularly what I like to call as the dark triad. You have these fake news websites, you have propaganda websites, you have trolling campaigns. All of these things are now getting highlighted in a manner in which they were not being highlighted before the election. So we are seeing the media doing the role of the watchdog, which it needs to do, because right now that's all we have going for us, given the state of politics in the United States.
All right, Arden, we'll come back to you in just a moment. Let's now go back to our U.S. Bureau Chief, Giles Gibson, to continue the conversation. Giles, let's switch gears and talk a little bit about conflict of interest. We know what happened with Uber recently when that ban went in. They got into a lot of hot water because of the CEO and his ties to Trump being on the business council, and then with Elon Musk with Tesla. How is all of that playing out in the United States with these firms sort of pushing and hoping to revoke that travel ban in the coming hours?
Well, that's right, Archie. It's Elon Musk, the CEO of Tesla Motors and SpaceX, is actually under a lot of pressure at the moment because while his company, Tesla, are one of these 127 signatories to this action against the Trump executive order on immigration, Musk is actually still part of Donald Trump's Business Advisory Council. He's saying that it's better for him to be inside that council, to be a voice within that group, promoting the sorts of issues that these tech companies are concerned with, an openness in terms of US border policy, so that they can attract the best top talent from India and other countries around the world to come and work in Silicon Valley. So Elon Musk is certainly under a lot of pressure at the moment to pull out of that advisory council, as we saw the CEO of Uber do after that long there was almost a strike against Uber. People were boycotting it on social media.
All right, Giles, thank you so much for that insight. With that, we're going to take a quick break and continue this conversation here on Gravitas and sort of dig a little bit more into Donald Trump as well as some of his potential conflict of interest. Guys, we'll be right back. Stay with us here. Welcome back to Gravitas. I'm Archit Seshadri. Well, at a time when Trump could possibly be taking a crackdown at the Indian IT sector, it seems that Trump himself has been a beneficiary of royalty income. Now, that's totaling to about $6 million US. Now, these royalty payments come in from Indian builders. So quite ironic, isn't it? Given that this whole idea of protectionism and the economic measures that Donald Trump keeps talking about to push his agenda and sort of slamming the IT sector while he supposedly is collecting royalties. So to get some perspective on this, we're now joined in the studio here in New Delhi by our special DNA correspondent, Kaushal Shroff. Thank you so much for joining us, as well as Giles Gibson in Washington, D.C., our bureau chief in the United States. We'll get to you in a moment, but first, let's give you some background on the story. A revelation to many that U.S. President Trump has made $6 million in India. Let's watch this report.
On immigration, I will direct the Department of Labor to investigate all abuses of visa programs.
When President Trump got tough on H-1B visas, India's IT sector took a big hit on the stock market, losing more than 30,000 crores in valuation in 24 hours. It may come as a surprise to many in this country that the man who inflicted such heavy losses has made millions from the same country. Documents accessed by DNA newspaper from the U.S. Office of Government Ethics show that Trump's earnings from Indian royalties, President Trump earned $6 million from 2012 to mid-2016 through his dealings in India. Documents show he received this money as royalties through his license agreements with real estate builders in India. The $6 million was paid to DT Marks Worli LLC and DT Tars Gurgaon LLC. Other companies that manage Trump's interests in this country are DT Marks Gurgaon LLC, DT Marks Pune LLC, DT Marks Pune 2 LLC. It is also likely that Trump is receiving royalties from Trump Towers in Pune. The global nature of his interests and, of course, the profits from it are in stark contrast to the protectionist measures he's been pushing at home in the U.S. Bureau Report, WION.
All right, now let's go to Kaushal Shroff joining us here in the studio in New Delhi. Kaushal, thanks again for giving us your insights. Let's talk about the Indian element to this. How interesting is all of this when it comes to that section of the population? Many students going here, many of the skilled laborers going to the United States. Certainly, many of them on edge as Trump continues to push his agenda.
Yeah, it's as you said, it was quite ironic in the sense that Mr. Trump is pushing for this protectionist economic measures at a time when his own commercial interests are coming in from India. Right. So Indian builders entered into a license agreement with Mr. Trump, and under this particular license agreement, Mr. Trump ended up receiving $6 million between 2012 to mid-2016. Now, this seems ironic in the sense that the very country against which Mr. Trump is about to take very harsh measures, the kind of blow that it's going to deal to the entire IT sector in India, it's massive. So just to give you an idea of the kind of damage that the Indian IT sector could end up taking is this. Indian IT companies end up paying 1.16 lakh crores in terms of wages to engineers.
Right.
Not just that, they end up employing about 1 million people. So the moment the H-1B visa reforms that are being pushed so aggressively by Mr. Trump, the moment they're accepted, the moment they're adopted by the US government, there is going to be a massacre of sorts for the Indian IT industry. So at such a time, the entire point of the story is that Mr. Trump should have a rethink on the kind of policies, on the kind of agenda he's pushing for, because his very commercial interests are also coming from India.
And that could be at a risk. The $6 million in royalties he's collected could be jeopardized in that sense.
Yeah, exactly. So the moment you push for those H-1B visa rehaul, you're hurting the very people, you're hurting the very IT companies, you're hurting their bottom line, you're hurting the very engineers who are going to end up
helping you.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, going with that, with regards to that, we had a discussion earlier on with a former CIA officer. It seems like a lot of the things that Donald Trump talked about, during his building the wall, repealing Obamacare, everything that he said certainly seems like he's living up to that promise. And give us a sense of, for our global audience, how is Trump being perceived here in India and South Asia? What is the viewpoint? Many people, when we were there covering the elections and Trump won, the business community, even the Indian Americans who are dealing with business just like Trump is, were thrilled, or were certainly rooting for Donald Trump, not Clinton. But the overall, the wider community, the doctors and the IT folks, the engineers, the other professionals, how are they viewing Donald Trump and his bold moves?
The IT domain in India is scared right now.
Right.
It's if you just have a look at the kind of performance that the scripts of IT companies have performed, the moment this entire news broke through that there would be reforms in terms of H1B visas given out, that very moment the scripts, the stocks of, be it Infosys, be it Wipro, be it Tech Mahindra,
right,
be it HCL Tech, they all started plunging. So that's the kind of impact that Mr. Donald Trump and his policies, that is the kind of impact that it could end up having. What's more interesting is that whatever data that was extracted out of the United States Office of Government Ethics, Mr. Trump has about 564 units, or let's say LLCs and other companies and corporations in which he has commercial interest.
Right.
Now, out of all the 564 units or LLCs, none of them are from the countries which have been put under a ban by Mr. Trump, namely Iran, Iraq, Somalia, Sudan, Yemen and Libya. So this is sort of a discriminatory policy that Mr. Trump is going through with. And my major concern out here is the kind of massive damage it is going to cause to the Indian IT industry. The moment there is a hit to the Indian IT industry, there will be ripple effects of it.
Sure.
You will have damage to Indian housing, Indian automobiles, Indian FMCG
Many sectors that could be impacted.
There would be a massive ripple effect.
With regards to this. Let's now go to Giles Gibson, standing by in Washington, D.C., our bureau chief. Giles, the U.S. reaction when it comes to all of this, your thoughts with regards to Trump's interest in India earning that $6 million royalty, especially as he continues to push his agenda?
Well, I think Donald Trump would come out and say that there's no double standards in this report that we've seen from our sister publication, DNA. I remember during the presidential debates between Trump and Hillary Clinton, Trump was repeatedly accused of sort of having double standards around his bankruptcy, around his tax status. And he would repeatedly say, essentially, that his actions as a businessman, that he would take advantage of any sort of market conditions or tax conditions, anything at all for his business. But then when he takes over as president, he's said that he's not running the Trump company anymore. That's being all the day-to-day running, and actually the future sort of strategy for the company has been put in the hands of his two sons, Eric and Donald Jr. So Donald Trump would certainly defend himself against this story, I think, by saying that there's no double standard, that his actions as a businessman were in the past, and that he's now separated himself from the Trump organization. Of course, many people in the liberal media here would still accuse him of double standards. There was a story just the other day about taxpayers footing the bill for Eric Trump, Donald Trump's son, going to Uruguay, and it was around $100,000, just under, for the Secret Service hotel room bill. So there is still clearly a feeling amongst some parts of American society that Donald Trump's business interests are still overlapping with his politics, even though he says he's separated himself away from his business.
And Giles, sort of like a high-level, perspective with regards to, the people that he's sort of looking to support and promise and trying to make America great again. It looks like he's isolated the Republicans, people within his own party. Looks like now he's isolating the immigrants, Mexicans, and now folks from these 7 Muslim-majority countries. Looks like he's even isolating the business community. So it's almost begging the question, who next? I've gotten a live question here from a doctor who's saying that, as a doctor, what I want to know is will Trump do whatever he says he will to provide insurance and cover all Americans as he's promising? It almost looks like who's he going to isolate next as opposed to who he's going to support next. Your thoughts?
Yeah, Archie, well, I think the really important point here is that even though Donald Trump, yes, he is taking a huge amount of heat from certain parts of American society on his action towards Obamacare and, of course, this immigration executive order. But there is a large part of American society who believe that Donald Trump is doing exactly what he said he would do during the campaign. And not only that he's doing a great job. There was some polling numbers that I saw last week. And the numbers of people who are against Donald Trump's executive order on immigration is matched by the people who support it. So I think whenever we're discussing Donald Trump and his first sort of month, we do have to bear in mind that there is a big proportion of American society who are supporting what he's doing. They believe that he's doing exactly what he said he would do, and that these measures are going to keep America safe.
All right, Giles Gibson joining us from Washington, D.C. Thanks for your perspective, as well as our in-studio guest, our correspondent, Delia Schwab. We appreciate your input. And just to sort of wrap all of this up, putting things into perspective, again, the next round of fight for President Donald Trump as he continues now in court to see whether or not he can prevent this ban from happening that the courts are dealing with from 7 Muslim-majority countries. That hearing will take place at 6 p.m. Eastern time there. That's about 4:30 a.m. here, India time. The attorneys from the Justice Department and Washington State will have about an hour to make their arguments. The department there will argue that the suspension of Trump's travel ban is just too broad and at most should be limited to people who were already granted entry to the country. So we're going to have much more on this later on. But for right now, that is it for Gravitas. Thanks for the special bulletin. Good night.